for goodness sake, as basic as it sounds, a smile is the most non-threatening. No, have a good photo on your LinkedIn so they know who they're coming to see. So I'm coming to reception. I'm looking for somebody whose photo I remember, not a stranger, because strangers are danger, right? And
Totally.
my sort of neuroscience influence sales process is do that connection, get them comfortable. Uncomfortable brains don't buy.
Welcome to the Full Funnel Freedom Podcast. If you are listening to this, you are likely leading a team responsible for generating revenue. Purpose of Full Funnel Freedom is to support people like yourself and keep your funnels consistently, reliably full. Welcome to the Full Funnel Freedom Podcast. I'm your host, Hamish Knox. Today, I am delighted to have Simon Hazeldine as my guest. Simon works internationally as a keynote and conference speaker, sales transformation consultant, and as a sales and negotiation trainer. He has spoken in over 30 countries, and his client list includes some of the world's largest and most successful companies. Simon has a master's degree in psychology, is the best-selling author of 9 books that have been endorsed by a host of business leaders, including multi-billionaire business legend Michael Dell, and is the co-founder of the UK's leading sales podcast, The Sales Chat Show. Simon, welcome to Full Funnel Freedom.
Thank you very much for having me, Hamish. Great to be here.
So I've given the audience the 30,000 foot view, who you are
sure.
and what you do. Take us down a level. Tell us the story of Simon and how you got from where you were to where you are today.
Yeah, so I think like quite a lot of people that I meet in the world of sales, I wasn't necessarily planning on sales as a career. Left university, didn't really know what to do, did a couple of different jobs, and then kind of by accident ended up in sales. Somebody gave me a piece of advice, which is kind of amusing now. You should be in sales. You talk a lot, which is probably not correct. But yeah, so I got into sales, and fortunately for me, got into a good FMCG, fast-moving consumer goods drinks company. 18 years there. Became head of the sales academy and some other roles. Last 14 years, had my own consultancy and training business, helping my clients more sales more often with more margin. Help sales leaders to build high performance organizations that people want to belong to.
I love it. And we will certainly touch on your books because you and I are both neuroscience nerds. I have the model of a human brain in my office. So that's really
Me
resonates
too.
with us. Where I want to start though is this talk of margin. Because as sellers, and I remember when I was in sales, I didn't think about margin, right? I thought about what was the number on the order sheet or what was the number on the
Yeah.
agreement. And so when you're having conversations with the sales leaders that you support, how does margin come up and what are the typical frustrations that they're facing when it comes to margin in their business?
Always margin will appear to be under pressure. Customers will always, I guess, be attempting to get the very best value for money for them. And often that will equate to trying to get the price as low as possible. I spend a lot of time working with salespeople on negotiation. Provocative statement, most salespeople don't make great negotiators, is my general view. There's no reason why they shouldn't, but their comfort zone is selling. And a lot of the time they will say, help us to negotiate the price, help us to negotiate this, help us to keep the margin up. Well, good selling needs to come before good negotiation. Selling, finding out what the customer needs, convincing them of the value, what you've got to offer, and then negotiation, agreeing the terms upon which that will take place. So the better the value perception, the value proposition, however you want to quantify that, then there'll be less price sensitive, and the margin pressure, I think, will lessen. It's not like it's going to go away necessarily, but they're convinced you're the right choice, the product, the service, the offering is correct. So maximize on that value, show the business value, the personal value, lower the risk to them of purchasing, and they'll be happier to pay that higher price. But I think it's really important from a KPI or objective or targeting that we used to call it the tension triangle when I was in fast moving consumer goods, because we were equally compensated for the volume we sold, the overall revenue, the dollars, the pounds, but also the margin. And that, I think, helps salespeople to think about their territory or to think about their customers as their own business, and make better decisions.
Yeah, the idea of compensating purely on revenue or purely on dollars closed is crazy. We had a client years ago in the Midwestern U.S., and they had a salesperson who sold $5 million of stuff, which was very good. That was a very good year at cost.
Yeah.
So the comp plan changed dramatically the following year. That salesperson made out like a bandit, and the company was actually underwater once they paid the commission. They ended up underwater in terms of they made negative margin on those sales because the seller just went out and did top line instead of thinking about margin. I'm curious about something you just said around risk, because this is something that a lot of sales leaders are talking about. They're hearing it from their teams. We got more people on the buying side. Everyone's trying to do, no, it's their decision. How do we coach our sellers to make decisions less risky for the buyer or reduce that perception of risk?
Yeah. So there's always a risk when we all buy, there's a risk, but depending on either the financial value of what they're buying or the strategic importance of it to the business, the risk perception of the customer will be much higher. So I always say when we sort of have a little framework or like a value proposition, how do we lower the risk? Testimonial, case study, pilot, demos, to lower the risk, but also who are likely to be the more risk averse people in the buying decision. Well, legal obviously are designed, so if legal are going to be involved in the purchasing decision and you're not interacting with them, then you've left it kind of late. But I think also identify, who are the people who have the most influence across the decision-making unit or the buying unit, and make sure that where we can, and can't always get to these people. I understand that sometimes they're kind of hard to get in front of, but you've got to get some time with them and to build their confidence and be seen, frequently, and then you become more known. And I think show that you've done it before. Clients, very popular now is using stories as part of selling. Very powerful way. Robert Cialdini would refer to this as social proof. Show them you've done it before. We sometimes will, in pitches, we'll say, here's some of our logos. Everybody shows you the logos. You choose one, you choose two. We'll connect you directly with that customer. We won't be on the call. Ask them anything you want to know. And, to be fair, I would say 2 times out of 10, people take us up on that offer. But because you've made that offer, it gives them that, well, okay, I know this guy's a sales guy, so he's not going to connect me with somebody who they've done a really bad job for. But they have a buyer similar to them as well, and that can be a powerful way to reduce. But also, as we know, the more people involved in the decision, the less likely it is to go ahead.
Very true. When I sold software as service, and at some point I'd be talking to my buyer and I'd say, hey, I bet legal's got to get involved. And they kind of roll their eyes, be like, oh yeah, legal. And I said, well, we have a timeline. Like you shared with me, you need this platform up and running by this date. How do we get legal involved? And so by preempting it, and that raised the credibility with my direct contact. And yeah, of course, legal wanted to redline things. That's their incentive. That's what they're paid to do. Got it. Ultimately, the things that they were looking to redline were pretty minor, and we were able to get things back of greater or equal value for every concession that we made. And so ultimately we ended up with case studies, testimonials, et cetera, which is really, really powerful. So I love that you brought up that idea of social proof, because ultimately our buyers just want a little bit of comfort. They don't necessarily want to talk to our current clients. I'm shocked that 2 out of 10 is even that high. From my experience, it's much less than that. So Simon, let's take this a little bit forward, and risk ties into the brain, and our brains are wired to keep us safe, which usually means stuck. So when you're working with sales leaders and helping them with their teams, how do we, number one, get our sales teams unstuck from certain mindsets that they might have about the market, about the pricing, about the product, whatever it might be?
Yeah, I think one thing, sales leaders listening in, there's Australian neuroscientist David Rock, works in the US, I think now. He has a great model. They're just good for leaders, I think, to know about the SCARF model, that his research into how the brain, positively, negatively responds. So it's status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. So if people Google that and have a look at that, I think that's a good how to manage your people effectively. There's some good input there. I think we are all creatures of habit, like you say. Our brains are kind of going to be hardwired to certain ways of behaving. And my research when I was doing NeuroCell, my book on neuroscience, had Dr. Colin Wallace as my technical advisor. Colin will say, brain has not changed much in 100,000 years. So it's still on the lookout for saber-toothed tigers and fear. And so certainty and doing the same thing feels safe. And that's probably why 75% of change initiatives kind of fail, So first thing I think is don't underestimate how stuck people can get. But then you're probably what I think you're trying to do through coaching, for example, is you're trying to get what might be largely unconscious processing surfaced, and it's probably emotional and instinctive. Probably 95% of our processing is below the surface of the water. And get it exposed to the prefrontal cortex, and you start to do some, analysis, and they kind of go, oh yeah, actually. I've had the great privilege of managing several psychic salespeople over the years who will say why didn't you mention that particular promotion or whatever to the retailer or to the customer? And they say, I just know they wouldn't want it. And I said, one guy, I said, Bruce, this is the first time I've managed the psychic. And he said, I'm not psychic. And I said, I know you're not psychic. Like, why didn't you ask? He said, I don't think. I said, yeah, but you didn't know, did you? You don't know. You don't know. And I am very fond when I'm coaching salespeople around deals and all sorts of things. Is this person the key buyer? Is this person, have they got the sign off? Yeah, I think so. Okay, do you think so or do you know so?
Yeah.
And that is also the other, And I've managed enough salespeople. But the excuse is territory's bad, marketing materials are poor, market is depressed. Good salespeople create their own economy. I think I'm not saying ignore the realities of what's going on, but results and excuses, you can't have both. The first guy I sacked, I was a lot younger than him as well, and his previous manager had problems with him, and I gave him some pretty tough feedback after a ride-along sales visit, and he got really hostile. How dare you say that to me? I've been doing this job for 10 years. I've got 10 years experience, he said, and I probably shouldn't have said this, but what just came out was, have you? Or have you just had 1 year that you've repeated 10 times? Because you don't look like a 10-year-old veteran to me, right? And that conversation didn't go too well. So I regret saying how I said it. I don't probably regret what I said, really, if I'm honest.
And my experience is when you do get those reactions, you've really probably touched on the truth, right? That's that reaction we all have, is we touch on the truth. And the sales leaders that I work with, one of the things that I share with them and share their teams is, until it comes out of the buyer's mouth, we know nothing. That's the mindset. So we can believe, right? We're allowed to believe whatever we want. I believe Simon is the ultimate decision maker. Okay. We'll go out and figure out if he is or not by asking a bunch of good questions. Yeah. And if he's not, that's okay too. Then you can start to build out whoever the buying group is. So until your buyer says it, sales leaders, your salespeople know nothing. And when you hear, like Simon said, I think, challenge them on that.
Yeah.
free offer for listeners of the Full Funnel Freedom podcast. Go to www.fullfunnelfreedom.com/scale to get your white paper, 8 Fundamentals of Building a Scalable Sales Model. If you're listening to Full Funnel Freedom, you are wanting your funnel to be consistently, reliably full and sustainably scalable. So go get your white paper, 8 Fundamentals of Building a Scalable Sales Model at www.fullfunnelfreedom.com/scale. Now, back to the show. So, Simon, let's carry on this neuroscience forward, because I'm a huge fan of it as well. So we get our sellers locked in, right? They've got the right mindsets. They've got the growth mindset. They're willing to go out and ask the tough questions, even if it makes them feel comfortable. Well, they're still selling to human beings. So those human beings have their own hopes and fears and dreams and worldview. So how do we support our sellers in more effectively communicating with those parts of the brain on the buyer's side that haven't developed in 100,000 years or so?
Yeah. So some of this is proof of the things that a lot of sellers will say, how important relationship is. People do still buy from people and those sort of things. But I think there are certain verbal and non-verbal things when you meet people for the first time. You don't get too close because that's threatening. And for goodness sake, as basic as it sounds, a smile is the most non-threatening. Have a good photo on your LinkedIn so they know who they're coming to see. So I'm coming to reception. I'm looking for somebody whose photo I remember, not a stranger, because strangers are danger, right? And
totally.
My sort of neuroscience influence sales process is do that connection, get them comfortable. Uncomfortable brains don't buy. So comfortable, the normal small talk, it's a very, very important part of human interaction, and a couple of psychologists called it the human dog sniffing act, which is a bit of a gross example, but we're kind of getting a feel for each other, and we just get and then settling in. So uncomfortable brains don't die. So we got to get them comfortable, asking them questions, get them thinking, that get their brains engaged, and they're expecting a pitch, so don't. or give the buyer control of the meeting by saying, what I'd really like to do is begin by asking you some questions, and then if I think we might be able to help you, maybe we could talk about. So de-risk it. Absolutely. When I'm prospecting, I'll often use language like, it'd be great to have a chat. It'd be great to grab a coffee, chat, like lowering the perception of risk that they're not going to get a bit of humor sometimes. I sometimes put PS, I promise to leave all of my PowerPoint slides at home, and humor's a great one as well. That can also just get people kind of calm, but like, don't rush in, get the customer settled, get the brain comfortable, get them feeling that all what a good salesperson has done for centuries, right? There was a piece of research into virtual negotiation that if people indulged in 5 minutes of that casual conversation, the commercial outcomes of the negotiation was better. The parties trusted each other more and were happier with the result than like control groups who would just go, bang, Hamish, right, let's do a deal.
Yeah.
We're dealing with a human being, and if you're selling virtually, get your cameras on, or I will come and hunt you down and haunt you for the rest of your life. Like, for goodness, the number of sales, they're not on camera, and I'm just like, drives me nuts, right?
Yeah.
Get on camera.
It's mind-boggling that we forget that we're still selling to humans, right? We're all human, right? We're still human, and we need to create buyer safety, right? We have to make our buyer feel safe, because, as you said, there's the stranger danger aspect. There's also the negative experience with salespeople, right? Like, we've all had that negative experience with salespeople, and we're all salespeople. Doesn't matter what we're selling. So our buyer is going in, even if they've seen my photo on LinkedIn, or I've sent them a nice email or whatever, they're still in the back of the mind. They're like, when's the other shoe going to drop, right? When's Hamish going to ask for my wallet? When's he going to do this? And I found, and my clients have found, that when they can just sit and have a conversation, like they're two mates out for a pint, awesome. They end up with much better results, and they negotiate less, because the buyer ultimately trusts them.
It was Forrester research, C-level executives, 88% of the C-suite said they want to have a conversation, not a sales pitch for sales related meetings. So I think it's conversational selling, for want of a better word,
Totally.
is where we need to get to.
Hey man, you and I are completely aligned on this, Simon, and I love that you brought up David Rock. I have a 4-book Hall of Fame, and Your Brain at Work by David Rock is in my 4-book Hall of Fame. Absolutely phenomenal book, sales leaders. If you have not picked it up, highly recommend, and go check out the SCARF model. Was that what it was?
Yeah, that book is on my bookshelf behind me. There's another vote for Your Brain at Work by David Rock.
Love it, Simon. Well, we could talk and nerd out about this stuff all day long, but you and I have things to do and our listeners have things to do. So as we're transitioning into our final few questions today, I'm absolutely loving this vision you have of creating buyer safety, going and having conversations. I'm curious if you could go back and coach younger Simon, go back as far as you like, and you can say, hey, younger Simon, in the future, you're going to be this world-renowned speaker, best-selling author. You're also going to have a lot of scar tissue and bumps and bruises. What would you coach younger Simon to do to get to the same place, but with fewer bumps and bruises and maybe a little less scar tissue?
What younger Simon was very, very fortunate to get was as after about 18 months in the drinks industry, fast-moving consumer goods, I actually got the best coach. He's a guy who was coaching, I think, before coaching was really invented, Hamish. And he was the guy who actually turned me from being a bit of a wet behind the ears, like overconfident. My level of confidence far exceeded my competence. And he was the guy who managed to get those more equally aligned. What he was really good at was challenge and support. And I think some of the times, you don't know as much as you think you do. So always be learning. I'd always had a strong learning orientation, but Philip, the guy, was really good at finding out where your strengths, find your strengths, leverage your strengths, find your limitations, manage around them or overcome them. And I'd have probably said, you should have got a job with a really good organization. I got 4 weeks of residential sales training, and I did not realize how fortunate I was at the time. I just thought that was what everybody got. And that was the foundation. So I think I'd have said, get in with a really good organization and get a really good manager who can coach as a priority in your sales career. I'd have probably told younger Simon to have done that 2 or 3 years faster than he did. Because
fair enough.
He was an awesome. He sadly passed away a couple of years ago, but he was instrumental in turning me into something resembling a decent salesperson and account manager.
Well, I love that story, and I love that story of a mentor and an amazing manager. I believe that pretty much anyone who has any sort of success in sales had someone like you had, who challenged them and supported them simultaneously. Now, Simon, you are a best-selling author, and we will certainly link to your books in the show notes. And aside from Your Brain at Work, curious, what else have you read, watched, listened to, whether recently or in the past, that you'd recommend to sales leaders listening check out as well to further their own learning and development?
Yeah, it's I wouldn't say it's necessarily one particular book or one particular podcast. We were kind of aware of things like AI and the technology, but with ChatGPT, I think it's gone over some tipping point. And I really want to learn more about how that technology may be able to empower salespeople and sales teams. So, you can get AI powered software that will sit over your pipeline, analyze your deal hygiene, your relationship. It's going to do so many things. And I think particularly with complex sales, there's always going to be a very strong human element. I can't see that being automated anytime soon. Transactional, yeah. So it's going to be the interface between the human brain and the artificial brain, for want of a better expression, I think. So I'm listening to, looking for people who are experts on that, finding out a lot, taking some courses myself on AI to just kind of learn what 2025, 26, 27 is going to mean. Because I think tech agility, Data agility is going to become an increasing competence for sellers. It's you can get some really good CRM dashboards and use your analysis, and sadly a lot of people don't use it to its fullest. But yeah, use the tech. That's my big development focus for me for this year, 2024.
I love it. My friend Jordan Ledwin has a newsletter called the AI Sales Guy, which I subscribe to, and I would highly recommend. That's a really good one. Yeah, for me, the whole AI thing. You made this great point about it's that interface between the machine and the human brain, because we get this. Well, you're not going to be replaced by AI. You'll get replaced by a human using AI. Well, if we're all using AI, who gets replaced, right? Like we're all. So it's that the individuals who don't abdicate 100%, right? AI is great for like 80%, but it's that 20% where sellers really differentiate themselves to their buyers and really prove that value, in my opinion. So I love that you're going down this journey of AI, and I'm curious to collaborate with you offline on how that all goes for you.
Yeah, sure. Let's do it.
So Simon, last question for you. You have given us plenty of amazing ideas and insights and great wisdom today. If you had a closing thought, a final bit of wisdom, or something to plug, the floor is yours.
Yeah, what I'd say is to all sales leaders, there's probably 3 questions to repeatedly be asking your team, coaching your team around and getting them to be asking. And it's like, is the pipeline clean? There's no rubbish in there. If it's dead, it's dead. Take it out. Don't play this political nonsense of leaving $500,000 in and all that. So like, have conversations. So is it clean? Data's clean. Is it healthy? It's moving. You can see it moving from stage to stage. Every opportunity's got a next action clearly identified. And is it sufficient? If your quota's 5 million and you close 1 in 2, the maths is easy, right? You need coverage of 10 million. So is it clean? Is it healthy? Is it sufficient? And I think that also helps with, when do we really need to refocus salespeople on top of funnel activity? And and then use your data because you're better able to then predict what's likely to happen. So yeah, I think those and switching between forecast and pipeline reviews, so that you're not always current quarter, because you finish the quarter with the mad scramble, and then you dust yourself off and you start with a fairly bad looking next Q. So I think always switching. And yeah, if folks want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I post most days and share Sales Chat Show podcast episode updates and that sort of thing. It would be great. Yeah, great if they just let me know, Full Funnel Freedom Podcast. And I know, because you just LinkedIn, you have to now separate the people who say they've looked at your profile but clearly haven't. I was offered sales training last week. Looking at your profile, I think we could really. And I'm not saying I wouldn't benefit from some sales training, but
sure.
I think we might have got that covered,
Fair enough. So, sales leaders who are listening, we will put Simon's LinkedIn profile link in the show notes. So if you'd like to connect with them, remember, when you put the request out, say you heard about him on the Full Funnel Freedom podcast, and he's much more likely to connect with you. Simon, I had an absolute blast hanging out with you today. I really look forward to staying connected offline. Thank you for being a guest on Full Funnel Freedom today.
Absolutely, my freedom, Hamish. Good luck and good selling to everybody out there.
Sales leaders, that was an amazing conversation for me with Simon. As you've heard me talk about before, I'm a complete neuroscience nerd, so I could have chatted with him for probably the whole rest of the day, but all of us have things to do. Wouldn't have made that an effective use of anybody's time. So here's my takeaways from today's visit with Simon. First thing, here's your trigger point for coaching your sellers. The minute you hear a seller say, I think this, or I know this, that's the next one, right? So think, right? Think is the, okay, well, go out and find out, go ask the question. And know is the more dangerous one, right? Well, I know this. Well, as we said during the episode, until it comes out of your buyer's mouth, we know nothing. So whenever you hear a seller say, well, I know this, next question to ask is, hey, that's great, Hamish. When did your buyer say that to you? And if the answer is, well, they didn't, then it's a belief, and that's okay, right? We're allowed to believe whatever we want. We just need to go out and ask those questions. The other key takeaway that ties into that is this coaching idea that Simon talked about with his mentor of challenge and support. Challenge and support. I love this idea of we're going to challenge our seller and then we're going to support them with growing in increments. That is ultimately how we develop really successful sellers, and the ones who, when they do move on, because they probably will, they're going to talk about us the way that Simon talked about his mentor. Hey, I had this great manager who really believed in me, really supported me, really coached me well, and they also really challenged me. And the last big takeaway for all of you sales leaders listening today is this idea of selling to the brain in the way of understanding that the brain is wired to look for danger. So whenever we're talking to one of our sellers, especially if they're a newer seller, or when our seller is going out and talking to a buyer, whether they're a first conversation ever with this buyer or whether they've been a long-term client, there is that little bit in the back of the buyer's mind or our team member's mind of, when's the other shoe going to drop? When's the bad thing that I'm afraid of happening going to happen? So we need to use our language and our sellers need to use their language to keep the buyer feeling at ease. I've been using an analogy recently with my clients in training sessions and in coaching around a deer. Picture your buyer like a deer, and you've got some grain in your hand and you want to approach that deer and have that deer eat out of your hand. Well, all of us can picture that deer and how afraid they are initially. And even as we get closer and closer and closer, and maybe we've even got our hand right under the deer's nose, and the deer could just duck their nose down and start eating that grain out of our hand. If we do something that startles that deer, they're gone. Same thing with our buyers. We might have spent 6, 9, 12, 18 months building rapport, qualifying, getting to know the entire buyer ecosystem, and then our seller says or does something that makes the buyer feel uncomfortable, and now that sale, if it's not lost, has been pushed back significantly. Let me know what your biggest takeaway was on our social media. Thanks for listening. Share this episode with a sales leader or two in your network who you care about. Until we connect on the next episode, go create full funnel freedom. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Full Funnel Freedom Podcast. You can continue to support us by leaving us a review and a rating, sharing this episode with a couple of sales leaders in your network who you care about. I'd love to connect with you. I'm easy to find, Hamish Knox on LinkedIn. Also, if you'd like a free 15-minute call with me, go to www.hamish.sandler.com/how-to-sandler. Until we connect on the next episode, go create full funnel freedom.